Secretary of Defense left a crying boy, until a female soldier followed and found the truth. He stood at the gates of Fort Briggs, barefoot, trembling, and crying for help, but the Secretary of Defense walked past him as if he didn't exist. Cameras flashed, soldiers saluted, and the boy's voice disappeared under the noise of authority. No one stopped. No one cared, except for one woman. Sergeant Emma Hayes saw something in that child's eyes, something she had once lost herself, faith in what was right. And when everyone turned away, she followed him. What she found beyond the fences of that base would uncover a buried military secret and force the most powerful man in the country to face his own humanity. If you believe one act of compassion can change everything, subscribe now and help us tell stories that the world tries to forget. What began as a routine inspection soon became a battle between silence and truth, between obedience and conscience. Because sometimes the smallest act of courage doesn't just expose corruption, it restores what it means to be human. The morning sun rose over Fort Briggs, painting the gray walls of the military base in sterile light. Soldiers lined up with precision as black SUVs approached, their tires grinding over gravel. At the center of the procession, Secretary of Defense Richard Cole adjusted his tie and fixed his cold gaze ahead. The air around him carried an unspoken rule: no emotion, no hesitation, no mistakes. Order was everything. Compassion was weakness. As the vehicle stopped, a small figure appeared at the edge of the gate. A boy, no older than 8, barefoot and covered in dust, ran toward the convoy. "Please, please help me," he shouted, his voice trembling. The guards froze, unsure how to react. Cole frowned. "Get him out of the way," he ordered, his tone sharp and detached. 2 soldiers moved to grab the boy's arm, but he resisted, tears mixing with dirt on his cheeks. Watching from a few meters away was Sergeant Emma Hayes. Her posture was straight, her uniform crisp, yet her heart twisted at the sight. Something about the boy's desperate eyes pierced through the rigid shell that years of discipline had built around her. She had seen that same fear before. In the mirror, the night she lost her brother in a mission no one dared to talk about. Cole turned away without another glance. Cameras flashed, reporters murmured, and the boy's cries faded beneath the hum of engines. Emma's throat tightened. "That's not right," she whispered to herself, though no one around her seemed to hear. Her superior barked, "Eyes forward, Sergeant." She obeyed, but her thoughts rebelled. For the first time in years, the chain of command felt like a cage. As the convoy moved inside, the boy collapsed by the fence, clutching a small dog tag hanging from his neck. The letters were worn out, but one word was still clear: Eden. Emma's eyes caught it for a split second before he disappeared behind the retreating guards. Something about that name scratched at the edge of her memory, a whisper from her brother's final letter. "If anything happens to me, find Project Eden." The ceremony continued as planned. Cole gave his speech about strength and sacrifice, the crowd clapping at rehearsed moments. Yet Emma barely heard him. Her gaze kept drifting toward the gate, toward that silent cry for help that everyone else had erased. The applause felt hollow, echoing against a truth she could no longer ignore. After the event, the base returned to its usual rhythm, but Emma lingered by the armory, staring at the horizon. The boy's image haunted her, his trembling hands, the glint of the dog tag, the look of someone who had already lost everything. She knew she should forget, file the memory away like another classified moment. But some orders can't silence the conscience. Night fell, the lights of the base dimmed. Emma stood by her jeep, keys trembling in her hand. The thought of disobeying a direct order weighed like lead, yet doing nothing felt heavier. "If he's out there alone," she murmured, finishing the thought with a long breath. She tightened her jaw. Enough silence. The gate loomed ahead, the same one where the boy had stood. The guards recognized her, but didn't question the sergeant who had earned more medals than words. She drove into the darkness, guided only by the memory of a child's cry and a promise she never kept, to never turn away again. The headlights cut through the darkness as Emma drove along the winding dirt road. Every turn echoed with doubts. What if she was wrong? What if this act of compassion destroyed everything she had built? Yet her hands didn't stop trembling on the wheel. The air smelled of rain and rust, of something old that refused to die. After miles of silence, she spotted small footprints pressed into the mud. Her heartbeat quickened. Somewhere ahead, the boy was walking alone into the night. She found him by the remains of a village, silent, half buried under years of abandonment. Broken signs, burnt fences, and a collapsed church whispered of a tragedy long forgotten. The boy sat by a crumbled wall, hugging his knees. When he saw Emma, his eyes widened with fear. "I'm not here to hurt you," she said softly, kneeling. Her voice, stripped of rank and authority, sounded almost like a prayer. The boy hesitated, then pointed toward the mountains. "My mom's there, but they took her." Emma's stomach turned. "Who took her?" The boy shook his head. "The man in the black suit. He said my dad worked for him. He promised he'd bring him home." His words cut deep. Emma glanced around the ruins. There were spent shells, tire marks, and faded military insignias on the walls. Her breath caught when she saw one emblem in particular, the same as her brother's last unit. The connection she had feared now burned in front of her. As thunder rumbled overhead, she entered what used to be a community hall. Inside, the walls were scorched, papers half-burned, and a faint smell of fuel lingered. She picked up a photograph on the floor. 5 soldiers standing beside a smiling civilian family. One of the men was unmistakable. A younger Richard Cole. Her pulse spiked. "What the hell were you doing here?" she whispered. The boy watched her, clutching his dog tag tighter, as if it were his last protection. Her mind raced between duty and conscience. Reporting this could mean arrest. Staying silent would make her part of the same system that destroyed families like his. The boy broke the silence. "You're a soldier, right? Soldiers protect people." His words, simple and trembling, landed like a command stronger than any she had ever received. She nodded slowly. "Yes, they do." The resolve hardened inside her chest. She was no longer following an order. She was following the truth. Emma gathered fragments of papers, photographs, and a burned metal plate marked Project Eden. Each item was a piece of a story the government had tried to erase. She felt as though she was piecing together her brother's final message from beyond the grave. "We need to leave," she said, hearing engines in the distance. The boy's eyes filled with terror. She grabbed his hand and ran toward the woods, the sound of vehicles growing louder behind them. They were behind the wreck of an old truck as headlights swept across the ruins. Voices echoed, soldiers searching, barking commands. "No one's supposed to be here," one shouted. Emma held her breath, shielding the boy with her body. When the patrols passed, she exhaled shakily. Her mind screamed that this was madness, but her heart knew it was purpose. She turned to him. "What's your name?" "Daniel," he whispered. "My dad's name was Captain Reed." Her blood froze. Reed, her brother's best friend. As dawn approached, Emma and Daniel reached the edge of a dried riverbed. The rising sun revealed the boy's dog tag again, engraved with both their father's unit number. She closed her eyes, fighting the tears. Everything connected. The base, the mission, the lie. The truth was no longer hidden in dusty files. It was walking beside her, holding her hand. The decision was made. She would go back, not as a soldier bound by silence, but as a witness ready to confront the system that stole everything from them both. The sun had barely risen when Emma and Daniel reached a remote checkpoint on the outskirts of the base. She stopped the jeep behind an abandoned storage shed, scanning the horizon. The boy was asleep, curled up in the back seat, clutching his dog tag like a lifeline. Emma exhaled, her pulse still racing from the night's escape. She knew return would mean breaking protocol and risking her career, maybe her freedom. But truth, once seen, cannot be unseen. She whispered to herself, "You can't bury this anymore." Inside the base, Emma sought out Captain Miller. The veteran's eyes were weary, the kind that had seen too much and said too little. He frowned when she placed a burned photo and metal plate on his desk. "Where did you find this?" he muttered, voice low. "In the old village. Cole was there, wasn't he?" Emma asked. Miller looked away. His silence was answer enough. "That operation, it wasn't supposed to exist," he said finally. "Project Eden was buried before you even enlisted." Emma's jaw tightened. Buried along with my brother? The words came like a punch. Miller flinched, his facade cracking. We were told it was a clean evacuation, he said, guilt pressing on every syllable. But it wasn't, was it? She pressed. No, he admitted, voice breaking. Civilians died. Soldiers, too. Cole signed the reports. Said it was necessary. His eyes glistened under the office light. For a moment, Emma saw not an officer, but a man haunted by ghosts he never exorcised. She leaned closer. You can still make it right, sir. Miller shook his head. You don't know what you're asking. He controls everything. Evidence, media, commands. You take this to him. You'll be silenced before you finish your sentence. Emma placed a dog tag on the table, the faint engraving catching the light. That boy's father died protecting truth. I won't let his son grow up in a lie. Her voice trembled, but her conviction burned steady. Miller looked at her, seeing in her what he once was, brave enough to care. Later that evening, Miller slipped Emma a sealed envelope. These are the original mission files. Never meant to see daylight. Use them wisely. He hesitated, then added, and don't make me regret this. Emma took the folder, her heart heavy with both gratitude and fear. Inside were names, coordinates, signatures, the kind of truth that could topple careers. She realized this wasn't just about one mission. It was about the soul of the military itself. Her next step would change everything. As she left the office, the corridors felt colder, the walls closer. She hid the files beneath her uniform and walked toward the exit, pretending everything was routine. The echo of her boots sounded louder than usual. Passing to the main hall, she saw Cole himself, smiling for cameras during another press briefing. Strength through order, he declared. The crowd applauded. Emma gripped the folder tighter, her pulse sinking with every lie she heard. Behind the applause, she saw the faces of those forgotten by that order. That night, she returned to the boys' temporary shelter in an abandoned hangar. Daniel was drawing shapes on the dusty floor, two stick figures holding hands. That's my dad, he said quietly. And that's me. Emma knelt beside him. Your dad was brave. He didn't die for nothing. The boy looked up, hopeful. Are you going to tell them the truth? She smiled faintly, hiding the fear behind her eyes. Yes, Daniel. Tomorrow, they'll all hear it. The boy nodded, unaware of the storm waiting at dawn. When morning came, soldiers gathered for a grand assembly. The secretary's convoy arrived, banners fluttering. Cameras rolled. Emma stood among the ranks, her hands trembling slightly under her gloves. The truth was literally under her chest, and so was her heart. The moment was coming. The one her brother had died for, the one Daniel's father had been silenced to protect. Her eyes met Miller's across the courtyard. He gave a subtle nod. The decision was made. It was time to break the silence of the powerful. The courtyard of Fort Briggs gleamed under the morning sun, filled with soldiers lined in perfect formation. Cameras flashed, journalists murmured, and banners proclaimed, "Honoring our heroes." Secretary Cole stood at the podium, his voice echoing across the base. Today we celebrate courage, loyalty, and the strength of our great nation. His words flowed like polished steel, sharp, cold, and empty. Emma watched from the front line, her jaw clenched, the secret folder pressing against her heart. Daniel stood hidden behind the stage, waiting for her signal. Cole continued, basking in applause. Every soldier here swore to obey. Discipline is what separates chaos from order. Emma's fingers tightened into fists. Around her, officers nodded, unaware that their idol was about to fall. She took a single step forward, her boots echoing louder than the clapping. "Sir," she called out, her voice clear, cutting through the air. The courtyard fell silent. Cole paused, visibly irritated. "Sergeant Hayes, this is not the time." "It's exactly the time," she replied, "because truth doesn't wait for permission." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Cameras turned. Emma walked toward the stage, unflinching. From her pocket, she pulled out the photo of Cole with the civilians. "Do you remember this place, sir? You were there when the village burned." Cole's smile faltered, but he recovered quickly. "That's classified nonsense," he said. "You're out of line." Emma's eyes hardened. Out of line is leaving a child to cry for his dead parents while you pretend to honor soldiers. The courtyard froze. Even the wind seemed to stop moving. Cole's voice rose, defensive now. Guards, remove her from this platform. Two soldiers hesitated, glancing at each other. Miller's voice thundered before they could move. Stand down. His command broke the spell. The men stopped, eyes shifting between their superior and the truth unraveling before them. Cole turned toward Miller, furious. You'll regret this. Miller didn't flinch. I already do. His words carried the weight of years of silence. Every soldier in that courtyard felt it. The first crack in the armor of authority had appeared. Emma took another step forward, holding up the burned file marked Project Eden. You signed these reports, sir. You called it collateral damage. But those weren't enemy combatants. They were families, our own people. The tension became unbearable. Cole tried to laugh, but the sound came out hollow. Do you have any idea what you're accusing me of? Of forgetting what honor means, Emma said, and of making men like my brother die believing in your lies. The name hung in the air like thunder. At that moment, Daniel stepped into view, clutching his dog tag. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The boy's small voice broke the silence. You told my dad you'd bring him home. Cole froze. His face, usually carved in stone, cracked under the weight of recognition. Who is this child? The son of Captain Reed, Emma answered. The man you erased from history. Every lens, every eye turned toward the Secretary of Defense, the once untouchable now cornered by innocence itself. Cole's mask began to crumble. This is emotional manipulation, he shouted. A staged act. But his trembling hands betrayed him. Emma said nothing, simply handed him the medal she'd recovered. This belonged to him. You remember it, don't you? He stared at the symbol of everything he'd buried, his reflection trembling on the metal surface. Daniel stepped closer, his voice trembling but firm. Why did my father have to die for your pride? The question struck harder than any accusation could. The courtyard was silent, time suspended between truth and denial. For the first time, Cole had no answer. The cameras kept rolling, capturing not the fall of the man, but the rise of truth in its purest form. Emma looked around, seeing faces awaken. Soldiers realizing the system they served was built on silence. The boy's tears weren't a weakness. They were the reckoning. Cole stumbled back, speechless, as the weight of years crashed down on him. The air changed. The lie had finally cracked open for all to see. The crowd at Fort Briggs stood frozen. The echo of Daniel's question, why did my father die for your pride, hung in the air like an unhealed wound. For a moment, no one moved. Cole tried to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. Cameras zoomed in on his trembling hands clutching the metal. The face that once commanded armies now looked pale, stripped of its armor of authority. Emma stood tall, her eyes locked on him, not with hatred, but with the quiet strength of someone who had finally stopped being afraid. Cole looked at the soldiers surrounding him. Men and women he had led with cold precision. Now none of them saluted. Their silence was heavier than any accusation. You don't understand, he finally said, his voice cracking. We did what we had to do to protect the nation. Emma stepped closer, her tone sharp but steady. You protected yourself, sir. Not the nation. Not the men who died for you. And certainly not the boys standing right there. His shoulders slumped, the mask fully shattered. Reporters whispered. Soldiers exchanged glances. And the air shifted from reverence to disbelief. Cole turned to Miller, desperate. Say something. Tell them it wasn't my fault. Miller's expression was grave. You signed the orders, Richard. You called them acceptable losses. The words hit harder than bullets. Cole's knees buckled slightly. For the first time, the man who built his empire on control had lost all control. Emma's voice softened. The truth doesn't destroy nations, sir. It saves them. Her words pierced the silence like light through fog. Cole sank to his knees, unable to bear the weight of his own reflection. The crowd gasped. Cameras captured the moment, a symbol of authority brought low by a soldier's conscience and a child's innocence. Daniel stepped forward timidly, holding out his father's dog tag. "You can keep it," he said softly, tears streaming down his face. "Because I don't need it to remember him anymore." Emma knelt beside the boy, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Your father would be proud, Daniel. You were braver than any of us." Cole tried to speak, but no words came. The truth had already spoken for him. Miller walked forward and removed the secretary's insignia from his lapel, placing it in Emma's hand. "You've done what none of us had the courage to do," he said quietly. Emma's eyes glistened. "I just did what was right." Around them, soldiers began to lower their rifles, not in defeat, but in respect. The sound of dozens of boots striking the ground in unison echoed like a heartbeat of awakening. As Cole was escorted away, the crowd parted, giving Emma and Daniel space. The boy looked up at her, eyes full of uncertainty. "What happens now?" he asked. Emma looked toward the horizon, her voice calm. "Now we rebuild, with truth this time." It wasn't a promise of victory, but of healing. The kind of victory that doesn't make headlines but changes hearts. The soldiers around them stood taller, as if remembering what their oath truly meant. Reporters swarmed, asking questions, shouting for statements, but Emma ignored them. Her gaze was fixed on the rising sun. She handed the medal to Daniel. "Keep it, not as a reminder of pain, but as proof that courage still exists." The boy smiled faintly through tears. Behind them, Miller raised his voice. "Attention!" Every soldier saluted. Not to the flag or the man who fell, but to the act of truth that had just saved their honor. For a brief, eternal moment, Fort Briggs stood in silence, transformed. The woman who once questioned her place in the system had become its conscience. The child who once begged for help had become its truth. And the man who once ruled through fear had learned the price of forgetting humanity. As Emma walked Daniel out of the courtyard, the applause that followed wasn't for victory or power. It was for redemption. The following days at Fort Briggs felt different. The once rigid base now moved with an unfamiliar rhythm, quiet, cautious, reflective. The banners celebrating power were taken down, replaced by memorial flags bearing the names of those lost in Project Eden. Reporters crowded outside the gates, demanding answers, while within the compound the soldiers carried a heaviness that no order could lift. For the first time, silence in the barracks was not fear. It was respect. Emma walked the same hallway she used to patrol, but each step now echoed freedom. News spread fast. The fall of Secretary Richard Cole became the headline of every major outlet. Truth inside Fort Briggs. One article read, "The soldier who defied silence," said another. Yet Emma felt no pride. Justice had come, but at a cost written in blood and conscience. She declined interviews, refusing to turn truth into spectacle. "Some things shouldn't be sold for ratings," she told Miller, who now worked to declassify old missions. He nodded solemnly. "You did more with one act of courage than most of us did in a lifetime." Daniel was placed under the care of a military family whose father had served with Captain Reed. They treated him not as a charity case, but as a reminder of what the uniform truly meant. On Sundays, Emma visited him. They planted small flags near the memorial wall together. The boy had stopped crying. When he smiled now, it wasn't from forgetting, but from finally understanding. "You kept your promise," he told her once. She smiled softly. "No, Daniel, you helped me keep it." Miller retired soon after, leaving Emma a note that read, "Truth is the only command worth following." She folded it into her uniform pocket like a new badge of honor. Every night, she stood outside the base and watched the sunset reflect on the rebuilt gate, the same gate where a crying boy had once stood alone. The contrast felt almost sacred. What began with neglect ended with remembrance. Months later, an inquiry commission summoned Emma to testify. She stood before senators and generals, unflinching. Her words were clear and measured. "If our strength depends on lies, then we were never strong." The room fell silent. Even the cameras stopped clicking. By the time she left the hearing, she knew the world might forget her name, but the truth would not. Outside, journalists shouted questions, but Emma's only answer was to lift her gaze to flag waving under honest sunlight. That evening, she visited the small cemetery beyond the base. Daniel waited beside a new gravestone bearing his father's name, and right below it, the names of the soldiers once listed as missing. They stood in silence as the wind rustled through the grass. "Do you think he can see us?" Daniel asked. Emma placed a hand on his shoulder. "He can feel you. That's what truth does. It reaches farther than lies ever can." A tear slid down her cheek, but this time it carried peace. As dusk fell, the bass loudspeakers played a slow bugle call, signaling the end of the day. Emma watched the flags lower, their edges glowing gold in the dying light. She thought of her brother, of Miller, of every nameless face she had fought for without ever meeting. For the first time, she didn't feel like a soldier trapped in duty. She felt human again. Her scars, once symbols of loss, had become reminders of redemption. Before leaving, Emma handed Daniel a folded note sealed in a small plastic sleeve. "What's this?" he asked. "A promise," she replied. Inside were the words her brother once wrote, "Find Project Eden." Daniel smiled, holding it to his chest. "We found it." She nodded. "And we found ourselves." They turned toward the road, the horizon stretching open before them, endless, honest, free. Sometimes courage isn't the absence of fear. It's walking into the unknown for someone who can't. If this story moved you, subscribe now to stand with truth and compassion. Like and share so more voices can rise against silence. Join our channel members to help us tell the stories of courage the world tries to forget. Because the fight for truth is never over, and your support keeps it alive.